attended council hearings in person. You tuned into our televised proceedings on Channel 13. Now you have the chance to listen to us on the radio as we demystify our work and the people who do it. This is not a council hearing. This is Hearing the Council with your host, Josh Gibson.
Thank you, deep voice person, the funky backbeat. Indeed, this is not a council hearing. This is Hearing the Council. You can't have a government without a council, so you can't have a government radio station without a council show. This is it. I'm Josh Gibson, Director of Communications for the Council. You may also know me as the voice of the Council on social media at Council of DC. Without any further ado, we want to welcome today's guest, Ward 5 Councilmember Zachary Parker. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
Thank you so much.
I think last time you said this was the hottest podcast in the Wilson building. Is that still the case?
Yes, it's the hottest podcast on the ground floor of the council building.
That's right.
I'm not sure if there's any other podcasts on other floors, but
so I had to come back.
Yes. And it was also funny because in our first interview, we talked about if you ever get called Zachary Taylor. And I feel like a month or two later, I don't remember who it was, but there was a pretty prominent case where someone called you Zachary Taylor.
It happens all of the time.
Yeah. So I'm continuing to hope that it doesn't happen to me, but I suppose it's just a matter of time.
Yes.
So anyway, the first interview we do with every council member is always the biograph of getting to know you. That's out of the way. So now we can get down to the meat and potatoes. So we have a bit of a kind of grab bag of topics to get to today. But the one I don't want to miss is a bit of a current events announcement, which is for folks that are hearing this in real time or podcasting early on. We have Ward 5 Day coming up. So what is Ward 5 Day and when and where?
Ward 5 Day is scheduled for August 26th, which is a Saturday. It'll be a fun-filled day, something there for everyone. We'll have a backpack giveaway. We'll have food, music, a live performance, vendors, giveaways, play parks and splash parks for children. And it will be at Turkey Thicket in Ward 5. And it's actually a long past tradition that we're bringing back. It was started by Councilmember Harry Thomas Sr., and it's something that we're reviving and hoping that will live on for generations to come. Later that afternoon, we'll have the first ever Ward 5 Awards program, where we'll be able to recognize how neighbors go over and beyond in their day-to-day lives to make what we call healthy communities. And that will be held at Trinity University at 6 p.m. Ward 5 Day will be from 10 until 2, although the fun will likely continue a little after 2. And we hope neighbors will come out and support. That will be, again, Saturday, August 26th at Turkey Thicket Recreational Center at in Ward 5.
Excellent. Okay, got the business out of the way now. So the other thing we're going to talk about is going to be some of the initial legislation you introduced. We have 4 pieces we're going to talk about. But what I wanted to hit quickly before we got to those was talk to me about your new council member. You know, you campaigned hard, you get in and you got your first bill you're going to introduce. Talk me through the thought process. Did you know all along what your first bill was going to be? Is this something you worked with your staff on? Talk to me a little bit about how that happens.
I knew I wanted the first piece of legislation I introduced to center on children and families. I didn't necessarily come in with clarity on what exactly that bill would be, but based on many introductory meetings, conversations with neighbors, you may recall we did a robust listening tour throughout Ward 5. It became clear that an area to support families and children would be the proposal of a district child tax credit, which is what we moved. Actually, before that, we introduced a number of symbolic street namings for prominent Black figures throughout Ward 5. That was at the end of Black History Month in February, but the first piece of legislation was the child tax credit. And it proposes that for families that are making under $125,000 or $175,000 as a joint unit, they can get up to $500 per child for up to 3 children. And that's important because we know that when children have a robust, supportive learning environment in their early years, it promotes better academic health and life outcomes. We also know that many families are grappling with skyrocketing childcare costs. And so this will put more money back into families' pockets. At the height of the pandemic, you may recall that there was a federal child tax credit that slashed poverty rates here in the district and across the country. That unfortunately sunsetted. And what we're trying to do is to revive it here in the district. We are hoping that we can get a hearing on this important legislation this fall and get it across the budget finish line next year so that families can benefit.
And this is something that the district has not had previously.
That's right. We've never had our own district child tax credit. It is very popular. A majority of council members co-introduced it with me, which I'm really proud of. And we believe it will be life-changing for both children and families.
Yeah, and this, of course, the long time sort of dark way of looking at things was, oh, we can't just give people money to help them because they might spend it on the wrong thing. So there were always these very targeted, we'll give you a little bit of money just for this if you prove to us.
Actually, Josh, there are some that think like that if we give people money, they will misuse it or spend it on things that they ought not to spend it on. Although research counters that and suggests that when people get money, even through our own district basic income pilot that is underway with mothers in wards 5, 7, and 8, is showing us that they're spending that money on housing goods and rent and taking care of their children. We also introduced legislation to provide targeted investments or a basic income for our poorest residents in the district. We are hoping that that also passes. And we believe that both of them together will provide a safety net that is essential for families to continue weathering the pandemic, but also make sure we raise the economic floor to combat rising violence, educational issues and inequities that we see, and ensuring that more families have a fair shot at quality life here in the district.
Yeah, and that I was queuing you up for that because I disagree obviously with the folks that think you can only give money out if it's mega targeted and mega tracked.
That's right.
During COVID, we saw, in a very large scale real life example, and where people had a lot of issues going on, so there would have been excuses if people had misspent the money, but we found that the money was spent incredibly intelligently, and if you give people credit, surprise, surprise, people will do the right thing and support their family 99% of the time.
That's
so
right.
I appreciate the unstructuredness of how this is being.
And I would just say, oh, I'm sorry. I would just say very quickly, Charles Allen and Chairman Mendelson previously introduced a district earned income tax credit that some are suggesting is a basic income. And so what I introduced complements that, and it covers people that are not included within that earned income tax credit that has already passed the council. So to your point, the council is already leading in this area, but we know folk that are underemployed or unemployed are not eligible for that earned income tax credit. They would be eligible for the basic income credit that I introduced earlier this year. So just clarifying for people that may be confused. Yeah.
And why did you go with the two similar bills?
Yes, because we think that it's important to, one, include families and individuals that are unemployed, knowing that at different stages in people's lives, things happen. And with the child tax credit that I talked about, one of the elements there is that you actually have to file an income tax return and be employed to benefit from that. The basic income legislation that I introduced would cover those that are in between work and don't qualify. And together, we believe that it provides just more robust support for families to pay for things like childcare and housing and educational resources and the like.
Now back to my process question. When you decide to introduce these bills, does it enter your thought process, who chairs that committee? How do I get along with that person? How likely are they to green light what I do and to fast track it, or are they going to slow walk it? Does that enter your thoughts, or is it just like, this is what my people need, I'm introducing?
Call me naive, but no, it really did not cross my mind. I'm hopeful that all council members would honor the need for quality legislation. I believe everything I've introduced addresses root causes to systemic issues that residents are facing. And so it's less me thinking about which committee I can get things through fastest, although maybe I should be thinking in that way because there's some committees that are moving faster than others, but I'm hopeful that we can see some movement on both the district child tax credit, but as well as the basic income legislation I introduced. And those are both, I believe, in Councilmember McDuffie's committee. We have other pieces of legislation that are in other committees. And then I'm excited that the symbolic street namings that I introduced at the end of February in honor of Black prominent figures, we just had a hearing with Chairman Mendelson. And so those are in process.
Gotcha. What is your prognosis for a hearing and legislative progress on the two tax bills?
Well, I would ask residents to reach out to Councilmember McDuffie and join me in asking for a hearing on those. I would tell you they are both really popular bills. The majority of the council co-introduced the district child tax credit. And so I believe the support is there. What is holding us up now is holding a hearing. We were not able to include it in the budget, but should we not have a hearing before next year's budget process, I will be vying to see if we can get the child tax credit included within the budget. We're talking about some $20 million of an investment, which is a large price tag, but that would pay huge dividends for residents across the district and putting money back into Washingtonians' pockets, which is what I believe we all should be trying to do.
And how do you think council members prioritize when you have bills with similar goals, like you said, the earned income tax credit, your two bills, and Kenny McDuffie's baby bonds law? They're all kind of different ways of getting at issues. How is that? How do you think the council prioritizes or compares between bills like that and decides which to move?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I think it's a bit of prioritizing things that are important to individual council members that may chair a certain committee. So if I introduce a piece of legislation, I think what I've noticed is that those bills tend to get hearings a little bit faster than others. And what I would hope that we would see in the future is that there would be a more systematic way of ensuring bills get hearings, ensuring things move through the process so that there aren't what some in some legislatures would call kill committees or chair people can just sit on a bill. I think that is something that we should explore in the next set of rules that we have coming up in about another year or so. But that is a lesson learned that, chair people of committees have a lot of leverage. And while that should exist in some respects, I don't think that should hold up quality legislation.
Right. When a bill has so many co-introducers and eventual passage seems like a foregone conclusion.
And to be yes, and to be clear, it's not just bills that I've introduced. I think all council members could raise their hand to say I've introduced a bill last year, years ago, and never moved. And as a result, what you then see is the reintroduction of bills that may have been introduced a year or two ago because they hadn't been processed or moved through committee. And again, I just think that is a council rules issue that we should be looking at in future years.
Yeah, one of my favorite council stories about that is when Mary Cheh introduced the Death with Dignity bill that is about to get axed by Congress, possibly. it went through Yvette Alexander's committee, and Yvette Alexander was opposed to morally opposed to the concept, but she realized that it was important to people. And even though she wasn't on the side of Mary Chey, of the introducer, she still had the hearing. The bill progressed and became law. And Mary Chey, in one of our interviews, brought that up as kind of a profiles and courage moment when you realize something's important and you do the right thing as a committee chair.
And again, I would like to think that all council members operate with that same level of good faith, but I think that is how it should operate. It's not a matter of which council members I like more, which bills I support, but as a committee chair, and I'm looking forward to chairing a committee one day, it's a matter of honoring the institution and the work of colleagues and moving through in a systematic way bills and letting the chips fall where they may.
And I had it as closeout question, but since you just brought it up, it's a little early, but you'll get a committee in January of 2005. So have you given thought to what committees you might be interested in?
I have started giving some thought. I will just say less what I'm interested in chairing, because I imagine that may evolve over time, but I definitely think we need a standalone education committee. I am calling on there being a standalone education committee, and I think the chairman has done a solid job of advancing education issues, but there's only so much focus on education you could provide when education is looped in the committee of the whole. I think we could stand to benefit from an oversight committee broadly, and we would need to think creatively what that could look like. But it could be great to have a committee whose sole responsibility is to lean in investigative ways on matters of oversight across government versus leaving that up to individual council members or committees. And I think there is more work that needs to be done on the development of DC. And this probably falls under economic development. But I would like to see a more streamlined and systematic way of development in DC. And I've talked a lot about healthy communities. For me, that's around how do you create a shared quality of life for residents, regardless of what ward they live in, what background they come from. And we know that's not the case. All residents should be afforded a complete community, a healthy community that has basic amenities. That is not the status quo in the district. And I would love to see a world where that could be just a hyper focus of one committee, just around how are we guiding and stewarding development in the district so that we can address longstanding equity concerns. So those are three areas that I think it could be beneficial for the council to explore. Obviously, I'm an educator by background. I'm really interested in education issues. I'm not necessarily throwing my hat in the ring for the education committee, but I definitely think among those three, we need a standalone education committee.
Yeah, and it would be a shakeup to do a committee like you suggested, like a broad oversight committee, more of a structural or functional, organizational kind of committee, in the sense that generally you bundle agencies and then you figure out a title that goes with those agencies. But if you had a cross-cutting, systematic kind of reinventing government or investigative committee, it would be interesting because it might not, it would technically have the whole government under its jurisdiction, but just a thin layer, but cross-cutting. So that's
And what it would provide is added capacity to the council to conduct oversight. And right now, given that the average committee has 24 agencies under it, it makes the work of oversight really difficult. And I think that added capacity is really necessary.
Gotcha. Okay, let's get back to two other bills you introduced. The first two we talked about were financial. The second two are safety oriented. Talk about the school safety enhancement bill and the establishment of reasonable controls for the firearm industry.
Yes, so public safety is top of mind for all district residents, as it is for me. The School Safety Enhancement Act is in response to the public safety needs in our school communities. And we've seen a precipitous increase in violent incidents in our schools, from fighting to gun incidents to armed robberies outside of our schools, and our children are often in harm's way, primarily as they're traveling to and from school. And so what this legislation does is it calls on the Deputy Mayor of Education, working alongside our public safety agencies and OSSI, to enhance school safety guidelines. It also streamlines how schools are supposed to interact with MPD and other external agencies. And I'll give you an example. It is not uncommon for there to be a shooting in a community and a school going on lockdown. As a result, it is not always clear, from what I hear from school communities, when they ought to come off of lockdown, who their point of contact is. Are they talking to DCPS? Are they talking to MPD? Are they, is someone talking to parents? There needs to be clarity in that process. But also that legislation creates a new role of a school safety director. And this will be a non-police personnel, full-time, staffed at every school. There will be 2 slated positions at every high school, just considering the need there. And their job would be to support what school safety needs, logistics, operations. They would be the liaisons with public safety agencies and working with stakeholders to keep our school community safe. And that's really important because many of these school safety responsibilities fall on the school leader or the principal, that we already know in many cases means that's just yet one more thing a school leader needs to do. They are trying to be school leader, educator, support person, communicating with parents, and then to task them with the school safety responsibility is just a huge need. But also we're hoping that that school safety director can create school safety teams within schools, so that they're working with SROs that may or may not be in the building, counselors, and whoever else is tasked with school safety needs. They would all report and be under the school leader. So a school leader will still drive the work of the school building and be the one in charge. But this would provide added capacity to our schools to keep our school community safe. So right now, the deputy mayor is convening a task force to begin that work. Fortunately, in this last budget process, we were able to take out part of that legislation that has yet to have a hearing. We included the task force component of that legislation within the budget, which passed. It was an added amendment and it was accepted. And so right now the deputy mayor is beginning to create that task force. And I believe by January of next year, so 2024, they will come back with recommendations for those school safety guidelines, what that school safety director position should look like or could look like, in hopes that we can then invest in that rollout within next year's budget. And so the earliest that schools might be able to see something like this would probably be the 2024-25 school year, in an effort to enhance school safety. Very quickly, the other bill, the Reasonable Controls Act, is an opportunity for us to hold gun manufacturers accountable. Obviously, in the absence of federal action and legislation, it is hard at a local level for us to curb gun violence and the endless flow of guns in our jurisdiction. And so this legislation, which follows in the footsteps of some other states, and I'm saying other states, would empower our attorney general to file lawsuits against gun manufacturers for failing to reasonably control their firearms or their products when they end up in the wrong person's hands. Right now, we are working closely with Brooke Pinto, and who is the chairperson of the Judiciary and Public Safety Committee. She has committed to holding a hearing, which will likely happen sometime in the fall. We're also being very mindful and thoughtful of the congressional interference that is happening And we are not wanting to provide another entry point. And so beyond that hearing, right now, we're working with council colleagues to figure out when we might move forward with something like this. This legislation did receive the support of our Attorney General, the majority of the council. It received support from the mayor's team. And again, would just be yet another tool in our district toolkit for trying to curb gun violence.
So the legislation, if I'm understanding it, enables the Attorney General and citizens to initiate lawsuits in certain cases where negligence or illegal errors by gun manufacturers are found to exist. My question is, does that authority not exist currently? Is this just reinforcing what's already available, or do we need to literally provide this opportunity, or the lawsuits can't happen or won't succeed?
That largely does not exist. And with the influx of ghost guns, where literally people can be mailed components of a gun that they can assemble at home that can cause a lot of harm, we think it's important that these gun manufacturers and the people that are promoting more violence and bloodshed on our streets are held accountable. After the tragic Sandy Hook shooting that happened, the gun manufacturer of the gun that was used by the assailant in that situation was sued and went out of business. And so while no one faced, or I should say, while we didn't have gun legislation come down federally, parents were empowered to file lawsuits against the gun manufacturer. And again, it's just yet another tool. By no means do we think this is going to be the end all be all or the one and done piece of legislation. We need to continue to work to curb gun violence, but we think it will be another tool to provide recourse to families and communities that are just tired of the gun violence.
And you mentioned this in passing, but this strange new world we live in where anything we do that any other number of progressive jurisdictions that we've done in the past and other progressive jurisdictions nationwide have done, we now have to think, oh, are we setting up a piñata for Congress?
That's right.
Despite whatever we're doing being the will of the people and having been done a million other places, Congress doesn't have jurisdiction in the other places. So anytime we stick our head up, they're just looking to lop it off. And how do you exist in that world? I mean, you deliberately set your head up to get it lopped off, so at least there's attention drawn to the issue, or do you just duck down and try to just do moderate legislation that you think probably won't draw, Fox News attention?
I stand by the legislation. I think it is the right legislation, but we are being strategic and mindful of moving it forward. And by that meaning, we will likely hold a hearing in the fall, but we probably will hold off on moving it to the full council for a vote, so as to not tee up just another piñata moment, to your point, in a presidential election year, which, it seems like congressional Republicans are salivating at any opportunity to kind of thumb their nose at the district. We know that the people of the district elect their representatives, and we are acting on their behalf. And we don't have fair or neutral or even good actors, I would argue, by way of many congressional Republicans. And so we do have to navigate that world. And I know there's been some criticism in the past from residents wondering why the council moved this or passed that, knowing the threats of congressional Republicans. But I think now we realize the threat in a much more clear way than perhaps we did in the past. And I can assure people that that is being taken into account as we are thinking about legislation, as well as how we move on different pieces of legislation.
Yeah. And also, I think just passing what seemed intelligent to us and doing what our voters wanted us to do, that's the way other legislatures work, and there have been, whatever it is, 4 pieces of legislation that have been overruled in the history of home rule. Now, all of a sudden, it's a game, it's literally every time we poke our head up, we get nailed. So realizing that things are different and worse.
That's a game. Apparently, impeaching the president now seems to be a game to congressional Republicans. And, I won't go down the rabbit hole of all the ways that I think our federal partners on the right are regressing, and as a result are threatening not only district home rule, but our national security and standing in the world. But what I can say is I stand more resolved about the importance of statehood, and I believe more of our neighbors and residents are more committed to statehood, and we are seeing the consequences of not having statehood for the district. And so we are mindful of it. It's not going to stop us. We are being strategic, and I just would call on district residents to continue to stand out and call for statehood as we have opportunities in this presidential election that is coming up, as well as other opportunities nationally to continue to raise that banner as a clarion call for justice for all Americans, not just for district residents.
Understood. Well, from the sublime to the ridiculous, we're almost out of time. We're gonna go to our fun closeout round.
Okay.
Last time we ranked desserts, which is always, it's a hearing the council tradition. Always in our first interview, we do that. Now, this has been very popular with council members. I'm going to give you a random task, and I want you to tell me which of your colleagues you think is best suited to tackle that task and why. But kind of a speed round. So whatever is first come to your mind. First question is assembling IKEA furniture.
Assembling IKEA furniture. Which of my council colleagues would be best at that? Yeah. I would likely say Christina Henderson, because she loves data, she loves numbers, she loves following the facts, and so I think she'll be really good at following instructions, putting together furniture. Okay.
How about driving cross country? If you had to get in a car and drive cross country, which of your council member or colleagues would you pick for any reason to be in the car with you?
I would say either Brianna Doe or Trayon White, because I've seen at a distance them multitask while driving in a way that is impressive.
And you think you could survive being in the car with that person?
You didn't ask, could I survive? But they would be best driving across.
That you see, that's the funny thing about the question is different colleagues take a different cut on it. Some take the pragmatic cut you did. Some are just like, okay, I could be in a car with that person for a while and it'd be okay.
To be honest, I've outside of Janice Lewis George, I don't think I've actually been in a car with another colleague that is driving. So I wouldn't even know in terms of driving skills. I think Councilmember Lewis George is a great driver, by the way. But I would say Brianna Doe and Trayon White because of their ability to multitask.
Gotcha. Okay, how about cooking up a feast?
Okay, I have actually had the chairman cook cornbread for me. And it came from I want to say 1940 cookbook, and it was actually pretty good. So I'm going to throw out Chairman Mendelson because he's one of the few people that have actually had food that he's cooked.
Okay. You also want to try his waffles, which are also corn-based. He seems to have a corn baking tendency. We'll save that for a future episode.
But how many people have a 1940s cookbook? I just thought that was interesting. I was like, okay.
Interesting, but not at all surprising.
Exactly.
Given the source. Okay, two more and then we're done. Compiling a musical playlist.
Musical playlist. That is it. I'm gonna go with Kenyon McDuffie. He introduced legislation making go-go music the music of the district, and so I think he would have good taste and music selection. So I will go with him.
Gotcha. No one picks a chairman for that one, just to be clear. Okay, and the last and the crowd favorite, fighting off barbarians.
Fighting off barbarians. Okay. I would, that's an interesting question. I'm gonna say Robert White. I've seen pictures where he's bench pressing, so I think he's in physical shape that he could probably take a few barbarians. I would also just like to think that the council takes a lot of heat around the clock or year round. We get blamed for a lot of things that perhaps we shouldn't get blamed for. So I think all of us are, we've had our share of needing to fight off the barbarians, if you will.
Yeah, some self-defense practice.
Yeah. Yeah, yes.
So, okay, well, that wraps us up. Thank you for being generous with your time. I really appreciate it. Listeners, remember to subscribe to our podcast on SoundCloud or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search under Hearing the Council. Thanks again for joining us. Tune in next time. We're on DC Radio at 96.3 on your FM HD4 dial or dcradio.gov. I'm Josh Gibson. This is not a council hearing. This is Hearing the Council. Thank you very much, council member. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Josh, for having me on the hottest podcast in the Wilson building.
There you go. All right. Take care, council member. Good talking to you. Bye-bye.